r/NoSleep. I work as a night guard at a remote construction site. There are 5 rules you must follow if you want to survive. I've always been a practical guy, never one to believe in the supernatural. So when I was hired as a night security guard for a construction site deep in the woods, I thought it would be just like any other gig. The company was building a series of high-end homes in a secluded area, far from the nearest town. It was a quiet location, surrounded by dense forest, but that didn't bother me. I needed the job and the pay. The first night I reported for duty, my supervisor, Tim, handed me a sheet of paper with 5 rules. He looked dead serious when he gave it to me, and I figured he was just playing a prank. After all, construction sites are usually pretty mundane at night, nothing but empty trailers, heavy machinery, and the sound of the wind. What could go wrong? Tim, however, didn't look like he was joking. "Stick to the rules," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the empty, moonlit site. "If you don't, you'll wish you did. This place isn't like other sites." I chuckled to myself as I started my rounds, but Tim's words stayed in the back of my mind. Rule 1. Never go near the old crane at midnight. The site was expansive, with several buildings under construction and equipment scattered everywhere. The crane was at the far end of the site, near the edge of the forest. It hadn't been used in weeks, and it looked rusted and abandoned. Tim had been clear about it: don't go near the crane after midnight. I wasn't sure why, but I had no intention of questioning the rules. Around 11:50 p.m., I was doing my rounds when I noticed something odd. The crane, which had been motionless all day, seemed different. The large metal arm was slightly turned, as though it had moved on its own. I could have sworn I saw the shadow of a figure standing in front of it, a dark silhouette against the dim lights from the nearby construction trailer. I paused and stared at the crane, my heartbeat quickening. I didn't go any closer. Rule 1 flashed in my mind. There was something about the way the crane loomed in the moonlight that made me uneasy. I turned away, continuing my patrol. Rule 2. If you hear footsteps behind you, don't turn around. Around 2 a.m., the site was as quiet as ever, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the trees. I was walking along the perimeter of the site, checking the security fences, when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. At first, I thought it was just an animal or the wind causing the noise. But as I walked, the footsteps seemed to match my pace, getting closer with every step. I could feel my pulse racing, my instincts telling me to turn around and check, but I remembered Rule 2. My body froze. I kept walking, my eyes focused on the path ahead. The footsteps continued, and they were too deliberate, too human to be natural. I clenched my fists, trying to shake the feeling of dread creeping up my spine. I reached the corner of the site, and the footsteps suddenly stopped. When I turned the corner, there was no one there. Just the silent, empty stretch of land. I couldn't shake the unease, but I continued with my rounds, doing my best to ignore the growing chill in the air. Rule 3. Never, under any circumstances, enter the abandoned storage building. The storage building was a small, nondescript structure at the back of the site, close to the tree line. It had been locked for as long as I had been working there. Tim had mentioned it briefly during my training, telling me that the building was off limits, but didn't go into much detail. Just a casual remark about how some workers had disappeared in the past. That night, while I was walking the perimeter near the building, I saw the door cracked open slightly. It wasn't wide enough for a person to fit through, but it was definitely ajar. I hesitated. There was no reason for anyone to be in there, no one had been near that building in weeks. I remembered Rule 3. The door seemed to beckon me, but I resisted the urge to get closer. I turned around and walked the other way, but the feeling that someone, or something, was inside lingered in my mind. Rule 4. If you see any lights flickering in the trailers, don't approach them. The trailers were where the construction workers had stayed while they were working on the site. But the lights had been turned off ever since the site was abandoned, and the trailers sat empty, silent in the dark. Around 3 a.m., while I was walking toward the main trailer, I noticed something strange. One of the windows was lit up. The faint glow of light flickered, like an old light bulb struggling to stay on. I immediately felt uneasy. I knew the trailers were empty, and no one had been there for months. But the flickering light was almost hypnotic. My curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped closer, only to stop dead in my tracks. The light suddenly went out. I waited, heart pounding in my chest. But the light didn't come back on. The trailer remained dark. I stepped back and reminded myself of Rule 4, don't approach the lights. I turned away and walked back to the security office, my mind racing. Rule 5, if you see anyone in the forest at night, don't speak to them. Just walk away. By 4 a.m., I had seen enough. I was ready to finish my shift and go home, but as I walked along the far side of the site, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure was standing just beyond the edge of the trees, barely visible in the darkness. The figure was tall, its face hidden in shadow, and it stood perfectly still. I froze, staring at the figure for what felt like an eternity. The rules ran through my mind, but the one that stood out the most was Rule 5. Do not speak to them. Just walk away. I took a deep breath and turned to head back toward the main building. I didn't dare look back. As I made my way toward the office, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. The figure was still there, standing in the same spot, unmoving. I didn't stick around to find out what happened next. I rushed back to the office and locked myself in, not even bothering to finish my rounds. I spent the last hour of my shift nervously watching the security monitors, feeling the weight of those rules heavy in my mind. When morning came, I couldn't leave fast enough. As I walked to my car, I glanced one last time at the construction site. The trees loomed ominously in the distance, and I could swear I saw movement among the shadows. But I didn't stop. I drove home and never looked back. I don't know what I saw that night, but I know one thing for sure: I followed those rules. And I plan to keep following them. Because the next time I don't, I'm not sure I'll make it out. Despite my fear, I returned the following night. Bills don't stop piling up just because you've had a brush with something unnatural. But this time, I came prepared: a flashlight, a lucky charm my grandmother had given me years ago, and a sharp knife tucked into my belt. Not that I believed any of these would help against whatever lurked out there, but they gave me a false sense of security. Tim was waiting for me again. He didn't say much, just handed me the same sheet with the rules. This time, though, there was something different in his demeanor. He seemed apologetic. "You saw something, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I hesitated but nodded. He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "You followed the rules, though. That's good. It's the only thing keeping you alive out here." I wanted to press him for more details, but the haunted look in his eyes stopped me. Instead, I took the paper, stuffed it in my pocket, and began my rounds. The night passed uneventfully at first. By 11:45 p.m., I found myself near the crane again. The moonlight illuminated its rusted frame, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me. I glanced at my watch, 11:58 p.m. Something about being near the crane at this hour felt wrong, even from a distance. And then, it happened. A low creaking noise echoed through the still night air. My heart sank. The crane's arm began to move, slowly at first, then more deliberately. It swiveled, its massive metal frame groaning under the strain, and stopped, pointing directly at me. A chill ran down my spine. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a pile of debris. My flashlight flickered, and in its unreliable beam, I saw something, or someone, climbing the crane's ladder. The figure was gaunt, its limbs impossibly long, and it moved with an unnatural speed. Rule 1: Never go near the old crane at midnight. I turned and ran, not caring how loud my footsteps were. The sound of metal screeching behind me grew louder, and for a brief, horrifying moment, I thought I heard laughter, deep, guttural, and inhuman. When I reached the safety of the main site, the noises stopped. I didn't dare look back. By 2 a.m., I was patrolling near the tree line, trying to calm my nerves. That's when I heard them again, footsteps. They were heavier this time, deliberate, and far too close. My instinct screamed at me to turn around, to confront whoever, or whatever, was following me. But Rule 2 held me in check. Don't turn around. I walked faster, my hands shaking as I gripped my flashlight. The footsteps quickened to match my pace. I could feel a presence behind me, so close I swore I could hear its breathing. My mind raced with every horror scenario imaginable. Would it grab me? Drag me into the forest, never to be seen again? Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Instead, I kept walking until I reached the security trailer, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it and collapsed into the chair, my chest heaving. The monitors showed nothing but empty darkness. But I knew better. It was out there, watching. The storage building felt different that night, almost alive. The door was wide open now, creaking softly in the breeze. A faint, flickering light emanated from inside, casting eerie shadows on the ground. I wanted to ignore it, To stay as far away as possible, but something compelled me to get closer. Rule 3 screamed in my mind, but my curiosity burned hotter. Against my better judgment, I inched toward the building, stopping a few feet from the entrance. "Help me." The voice was faint, weak, and undeniably human. It came from inside. My heart pounded as I debated what to do. Was someone trapped in there? Hurt? But then I remembered Tim's warning about the workers who had disappeared. The rules weren't just guidelines, they were survival instructions. "Help me," the voice called again, more desperate this time. I backed away, shaking my head. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice trembling. The light inside the building flared brightly for a moment before vanishing. The voice stopped. The door slammed shut on its own, and the air around me grew colder. I didn't go near the building again. By 4 a.m., I was exhausted, my nerves frayed from hours of terror. I was walking the perimeter near the forest when I saw it again, the figure. It stood in the same spot as the previous night, its tall frame barely distinguishable from the shadows of the trees. This time, though, it moved. It stepped out of the forest, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. I froze, every muscle in my body screaming at me to run. But Rule 5 echoed in my mind, "Don't speak to them. Just walk away." I turned slowly, keeping my eyes on the ground, and began walking toward the main site. The sound of twigs snapping and leaves rustling followed me, growing louder with each step. The figure was following me. I reached the trailer and locked the door, refusing to look at the monitors. I didn't want to see it, didn't want to know how close it had gotten. The rest of the night passed in a haze of fear. At sunrise, I confronted Tim. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded. "The rules, the things I've seen, what aren't you telling me?" He sighed, looking older and wearier than ever. "This site. It's cursed," he said. "Years ago, before the company bought the land, something happened here. People vanished. Others went mad. The forest isn't just a forest, it's a boundary. And those rules? They're the only thing keeping us from crossing it." "Crossing it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tim nodded. "There are things out there, things that shouldn't exist. If you break the rules, you let them in." I quit that night. I didn't care about the money or the job. Whatever was happening at that construction site was beyond anything I could handle. But sometimes, late at night, I think about the rules. I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't followed them. And I wonder if, one day, something will follow me home. Because the forest never truly lets you go.